Travel back with me now to the Tennessee of the mid-20th century, a place that didn't always appear in the headlines, but was full of vibrant people living out their lives in tight-knit communities. This is where Buford Pusser's legend took shape, a deeply southern world where country stores sold sodas from ice chests out front, where gossip meandered from yard to yard, and where a neighbor's kindness was expected, but so was a firm sense of justice. The region was a patchwork of farmland, small churches, juke joints, and old highways that straddled state lines, sometimes creating lawless pockets that fed on vice, illicit liquor, and outlaw boldness. Such environments shaped men and women to be strong-willed, resourceful, and occasionally tempted by easy money. But among them, there were also those with an unrelenting desire to maintain order, to set things right, even if that meant pushing the boundaries of the law. Buford Pusser was born on December 12, 1937, in Finger, Tennessee, about as modest a setting as one can imagine. His parents, Helen and Carl, offered him a caring but disciplined upbringing, passing on a no-nonsense work ethic typical of rural families in that era. Growing up tall, he'd eventually stand well over 6 feet. Buford towered over other kids, and he didn't shy away from using his physicality to protect those he felt were being wronged. By all accounts, he was that kid who simply didn't tolerate bullies. Family stories abound of the times young Buford would step in and settle playground disputes with a silent glare, or by putting himself between a would-be aggressor and their target. Though these scraps often ended quickly, they left an impression. Here was a boy who felt compelled to stick up for others, even when the cost might be a black eye. In the 1950s, a wave of cultural change was rolling across the country, but the rural enclaves of Tennessee still felt separate from the frenetic growth in major cities. Rock and roll was rising, fed by local legends like Elvis Presley, and the swirl of the civil rights movement was beginning to gather momentum. Yet in small towns, big city headlines often seemed a world away. People worried more immediately about paying bills, feeding livestock, and patching up roads. A man with strength and convictions was respected, especially if he used that strength in a manner folks deemed right. As Buford grew into a teenager, he channeled that respect into an interest in sports, and later into professional wrestling, albeit briefly. He competed under ring names like Buford the Bull, a moniker that suited both his physique and personality. The sweaty, cheering crowds gave him a taste of excitement, a brush with stardom that must have felt far from plowing fields or working local odd jobs. Not everything about those early years was glamorous, though. Buford's initial plan to serve in the Marine Corps was cut short when a medical condition led to an early discharge. That disappointment was an early lesson in how unpredictably life could shift. Undeterred, he pressed on, wrestling across the South, picking up small-time paychecks, forging friendships with men who traveled from one carnival-like wrestling match to another. These might not have been the big leagues, but those experiences toughened him further. He'd see shady deals behind the curtains, side bets on bouts, and locker room hustles. The underbelly of the entertainment circuit offered a glimpse of the moral gray areas that people navigated every day. By his early 20s, he returned to Adamsville, Tennessee. He met Pauline, the woman who would become his wife, and slowly began settling into the rhythms of a married man. He took a job as Adamsville's police chief, a huge leap for someone who'd been traveling the wrestling circuit. At a time when many in small-town departments were simply known faces rather than highly trained officers, Buford's sheer size and determined nature quickly made him an imposing figure in uniform. Locals were intrigued by the new chief's unflinching resolve. Some might have murmured that the big guy sure has a quick temper, but there's no questioning that he got results. Minor crime rates, at least on his patch, dropped. People started noticing that rowdy troublemakers from out of town would think twice before provoking the Bull of Adamsville. By 1964, Buford decided to run for sheriff of McNairy County. He was barely in his mid-20s, and that alone was audacious. No one expected a man so young to go head-to-head with deeply rooted networks of vice and corruption. The county straddled the Tennessee-Mississippi line, a region colloquially known for its state line mob, a loosely organized ring of criminals who thrived on moonshine stills, illegal casinos, and other shadowy activities. The group's ability to operate came in large part from payoffs and look-the-other-way deals with local law enforcement. For many decades, these arrangements functioned like an invisible handshake. Folks who weren't directly involved often pretended to ignore them, and the criminals, for their part, only rattled the cage when profits or power were threatened. Buford's vow to clean up the county threatened them in a very direct way. The day he was sworn in as sheriff, Buford made it clear the handshake between the mob and local authorities was over. Buoyed by local supporters who were fed up with brazen corruption, he launched a ruthless crackdown on illicit businesses. Wasting no time, he raided illegal bars, brothels, and moonshine operations, destroying equipment and hauling in some high-profile suspects. It was a matter of days before the word hit the criminal elements. There's a new sheriff in town, and he isn't taking any bribes. For some, Buford was a hero, the champion who stood up for the little guy, who wouldn't be cowed by threats or money. For others, especially those who profited from the under-the-table economy, he was a ticking time bomb, a zealot who might tear apart an entire clandestine industry. Those early months were riddled with tension. Locals whispered that Buford should be careful, that they'll come for him. Even in the best of times, crossing powerful interests was dangerous. Rumors circulated that the mob had taken out hits on other lawmen before. Buford, however, seemed not just undeterred but spurred on by such threats. He often told friends in that calm but resolute style of his, "If you've got the guts and if you don't mind dying, there's nothing you can't do in this county." People around him witnessed how that stoic conviction shaped his day-to-day actions. He didn't just talk tough, he backed it up. Time after time, he'd personally lead raids, face down armed suspects, and throw himself into situations most sheriffs would delegate to deputies. No one, not even the unflinching Buford, could fully foresee the violence that was about to tear through McNairy County. He found himself targeted by multiple assassination attempts, sometimes narrowly escaping with bullet wounds, other times with cuts or bruises from savage brawls. The stories of how he got those scars started to spread beyond the county line, soon fueling a swirl of rumors. Some said the sheriff was practically bulletproof. Others told tales of how he could smell trouble coming. Most recognized that when you try to single-handedly dismantle a criminal empire, especially one with so many tentacles, danger becomes your daily companion. It was in the midst of that turmoil that Buford's personal tragedy struck, one which would forever color the legend of his life. On August 12, 1967, Buford and his wife Pauline were ambushed while driving on New Hope Road. The exact details of that ambush remain murky even decades later. Some claim the couple was lured out by a false call. Others believe it was a chance encounter with gunmen. Gunshots erupted, riddling the car. Pauline was killed instantly, and Buford was left with devastating facial and jaw injuries. The photographs from that night of a shattered windshield, a swath of bullet holes, and the body of a sheriff undone by grief reverberated across the nation. In one brutal moment, the cost of Buford's crusade against corruption hit home. Shocked and heartbroken, Buford spent days in the hospital. Surgeons worked to rebuild his face. The press came in droves looking for answers as well as sensational headlines. Sheriff's wife slain in ambush, read more than one newspaper. For the first time, the public saw the raw vulnerability behind the determined lawman as he sobbed over Pauline's death, vowing to track down those who orchestrated the attack. In a rare interview shortly after he regained consciousness, he reportedly uttered a line that became legendary in some circles. "They gunned me down, but they ain't got me yet." He'd lost the love of his life, but he hadn't lost his willingness to stand tall. This tragedy could have broken him entirely. Many a lesser figure would have quit, moved away, or tried to bury the memory. Instead, Buford came out of the hospital even more fueled by a sense of personal vendetta. The next few years turned into a series of high-stakes confrontations between the sheriff and anyone he believed had a hand in his wife's murder. He lived with persistent rumors that he was taking the law into his own hands. Some quietly applauded, others recoiled. And within that swirl of gunfire and heartbreak, a charismatic figure was cemented in the public's imagination. He was the man who wouldn't back down, no matter the cost. Yet while the broad strokes of Buford's campaign against the state line mob are well known, there are quieter, rarely recounted moments that speak to the weight he carried. One story comes from a longtime deputy who recalled finding Buford alone in his office late one night, staring at Pauline's photograph on his desk. He didn't speak, the deputy remembered, but the way he looked at that picture, you could feel the grief pouring out of him. It was like a punch to the gut. These glimpses of raw emotion, far from the public eye, remind us he was a grieving father, widower, and friend, not a two-dimensional hero from a Hollywood script. During the latter part of the 1960s, Buford continued to be reelected, a testament to the fact that many local citizens cherished his dedication, even if his methods raised eyebrows. His injuries from the ambush never fully healed. Multiple reconstructive surgeries had given him a stiff, lopsided grin, and his speech could be slurred at times. Physically, he might have been diminished, but mentally he was as relentless as ever. He compiled an ever-growing list of suspects linked to the ambush. There were rumors that one or two of those suspects met sudden, violent ends under questionable circumstances. Nothing was ever proved to be directly tied to Buford, though that did little to quell the talk. Some in the community whispered that he'd turned vigilante, while others believed he was dealing out a rough but warranted brand of frontier justice. In the hush of local diners, you'd hear seniors talk about how Buford cleaned up the county. They'd recall nights when you could hear a ruckus at a roadside dive, see headlights barreling toward it, and then the place would go dark as if the criminals inside knew their time had run out. Even so, the controversies grew. Allegations surfaced that Buford had seized money in raids, but never properly logged it. Some suggested he turned a blind eye to certain illegal operations that supported him politically. And perhaps the most glaring question of all was Buford's thirst for vengeance overshadowing his duty to uphold the law. This debate lingered long after he'd left office. Beyond the law and order narrative, there's another layer to Buford's story, one that delves into the emotional hardships he faced as a father. Pauline's death left him a single parent to their daughter, Dwana. Friends say he was fiercely protective of her. There's a poignant account of Dwana once overhearing him say he wished he'd been the one to take the fatal bullet instead of Pauline. When she confronted him about it, he just hugged her silently, tears rolling down that scarred face. That moment, shared years later by one of Dwana's friends, captures the depth of Buford's grief. For all the stories of him slamming thugs around or facing down gunfire, there was a man who at home was wrestling with the ghost of a future that was stolen from him. He had hoped for quiet nights with Pauline and a stable family life, a simple American dream that was shattered by sudden violence. Meanwhile, Buford's fame was growing beyond Tennessee, thanks in part to sensational news coverage and the general public's fascination with vigilante-like figures. In the early 1970s, he became the subject of a film that dramatized his exploits in McNairy County, depicting him as a near-superhuman lawman, smashing up illegal gambling houses and terrorizing criminals with a big wooden club. The portrayal, while certainly capturing the spirit of his crusade, didn't fully convey the toll it had taken on him and his loved ones. Yet the movie gave Buford a certain celebrity status, and in turn, it made McNairy County a surprising tourist destination. Visitors would drive by the site of the ambush, stand outside the county courthouse, and wonder if they could catch a glimpse of the legendary sheriff himself. This new spotlight brought a mix of adoration and uneasy scrutiny. Some residents grumbled that their once quiet corner of Tennessee was turning into a spectacle. Of course, the swirl of excitement around Buford also reignited old controversies. Victims of his raids claimed their constitutional rights had been violated. Others who'd lost relatives in unexplained shootings pointed fingers, sometimes in hushed tones, sometimes openly, saying that lawmen should be held to a higher standard. The rumor mill ran 24/7. Was Buford still receiving threats from out-of-state crime syndicates? Was he biding his time, waiting to serve up a final dose of justice to the hidden kingpins behind Pauline's murder? The tension continued right up to Buford's untimely death in 1974. He was driving home from a county fair in the wee hours of the morning when his Corvette veered off the road and crashed into an embankment. The car burst into flames, and he died on the scene. Officially, it was ruled an accident. He'd been driving too fast, possibly with a faulty steering mechanism. Yet conspiracy theories sprang up almost immediately, claiming that the same criminal elements that had ambushed him before somehow tampered with his car. Those theories persist to this day, sometimes repeated by folks who insist he had too many enemies for his death to have been the result of mere negligence. The coroner's report, as well as subsequent investigations, found no direct evidence of foul play. But for those who idolize Buford, it's more comforting to imagine he was once again the victim of an evil conspiracy than that a life defined by danger ended in a mundane car accident. In the aftermath of his death, the story of Buford Pusser evolved into legend, shaped by local recollection, Hollywood dramatization, and repeated retellings that sometimes blur fact and myth. His name became shorthand for a type of tough, uncompromising lawman who'd do anything to protect his own. For some, that image is aspirational, a symbol of a fearless approach to justice. For others, it's a cautionary tale of how easily righteous anger can slip into personal vendetta. Even among historians, debates rage about how best to interpret the evidence. Did Buford Pusser's crackdown have a lasting impact on organized crime in that region, or did his approach simply push it underground, causing criminal networks to pop back up once he was gone? To appreciate Buford's significance, it's vital to look at the broader cultural context of 1960s and 1970s America. This was a time when distrust of authorities was skyrocketing due to events like the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. People were hungry for figures who seemed to operate outside political double talk, individuals who wore their convictions plainly, whether you agreed with them or not. Buford fit that mold, in part because his larger-than-life persona was so difficult to ignore. He didn't speak in polished sound bites. He was raw, emotional, and at times unstoppable. That authenticity, combined with a swirl of tragedy and triumph, was irresistible to a public looking for real-life heroes, or anti-heroes. In the years since his passing, there have been multiple attempts to retell Buford's story in film, documentaries, and books, each adding its own spin. Some portray him as a near saintly figure, while others highlight the moral ambiguity in his methods. Over time, the narratives have expanded to include accounts from criminals who claimed they were framed or beaten. There are also emotional testimonies from people who said Buford saved them from a life of addiction or abuse by cracking down on the vice that had ensnared them. Interviews with those who lost loved ones in that cycle of violence underscore the complexity. It's never just black and white. Few historical figures can remain wholly above suspicion when their domain involves life and death stakes. Controversies about Buford's involvement in suspected retaliatory killings are still debated among locals and true crime enthusiasts. One name that sometimes surfaces is Kirksey Nix, a figure allegedly tied to the Dixie Mafia. Some believe that Nix's network orchestrated Pauline's murder, and that Buford systematically hunted down each person responsible. Official records of these suspects' fates are inconclusive, leading to speculation about who died in shootouts, who disappeared, and who might still be alive under new identities. The heart of the controversy, however, is whether Buford was a champion of justice or a vigilante, determined to repay violence with violence. It remains an unsettled chapter of Southern lore, one that stirs debate whenever new evidence or recollections come to light. In discussing the consequences and significance of Buford Pusser's life, one can't help but look at how his story changed the public's perception of law enforcement. At the national level, he became an emblem of what a single, determined individual could achieve against seemingly insurmountable criminal forces. His defiance of corruption resonated with communities that felt abandoned or exploited by crooked officials. In McNairy County, local testimonies suggest the crime rate did drop during and shortly after his tenure. There was a newfound wariness among criminals who had once operated with near impunity. But the vacuum left by his death would not remain empty forever. Organized crime is, by its nature, adaptable. Some older locals insist that once the dust settled, clandestine activities resumed under different leadership, less flashy but no less profitable. Toward the end of his life, Buford considered stepping into the entertainment world. Friends claim he was negotiating to star in a sequel to the film that had dramatized his life. His face, still visibly scarred from the ambush, would have been a stark visual testament to the reality behind the cinematic portrayal. He'd spoken about wanting to use any fame he had to push for better support for law enforcement, or ironically, for improvements in highway safety. In a twist of fate that still haunts those who admired him, it was on one of those highways that he died. His story reminds us that real heroes or anti-heroes are rarely clean-cut. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time. Their triumphs emerge from chaos, their nobility from heartbreak, and their flaws from the very convictions that fuel them. If there's a final takeaway from Buford Pusser's life, it's this: idealism, when brought into an imperfect world, can become as dangerous as the crimes it seeks to eradicate. Yet that very danger can also spark the courage needed to challenge the powerful and the corrupt. That's what keeps Buford's legend alive in Tennessee, back roads and beyond. The raw human complexity of a man determined to stand tall, even when everything around him was threatening to drag him down. And that's all for today's video. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.